Hello everyone, I'm Pando, Horizon Consulting CEOs. Welcome back to New Horizon Talks, a business innovation company. Horizon focus on the customer experience. The New Horizon Talks is a program whose main objective is to conduct in-depth discussion about innovation, technology, and its impacts in our society. You can watch the New Horizon Talks on Horizon Consulting's YouTube channel. Every Tuesday at 8 p.m., a new video with a different subject. Today, I'm pleased to speak to Stuart, who is the CEO of New Cannibals and a people engineer. Please join me in welcome Stuart. Stuart, could you tell us what the New Cannibals does and what does it mean to be a people engineer?
Thanks, Fabio. It's great to be invited to one of these sessions. Happy to tell you a little bit about what we're doing. Although I have to add right at the beginning, we're very much in the process of definition at the moment. I think ourselves, we're still trying to work out a little bit exactly what we're doing. But it's an exciting journey. So we basically, we're a network of individuals, like-minded thinkers who came together to really work at the nexus between creativity, consulting, education, innovation,
Nice.
in an area where all of these different points of focus tend to overlap. So that might mean supporting organizations with transformation and change. It might mean supporting a network of individuals to create new sources of value in a platform project or in a new ecosystem. We're really searching around the globe for new and innovative ideas that will help drive, ideally, social change within the world.
Mm-hmm. Nice, it's perfect for our conversation. Okay, the topic of our conversation today is how can innovation address the world's pain and suffering? This is a very complex subject to talk about it. Do you believe that is the expected role for innovation and technology, Stuart?
As you say, this is a really, really tricky question. It's almost a sort of holy grail type question, I think. I think what's interesting about the idea of innovation solving many of the world's pains is, I think, first of all, we have to have a better understanding of what we mean by innovation before we can really answer the question effectively. For me, in my work, I particularly look at innovation in two main streams. One is behavioral innovation, if you like, which is more the kind of thinking innovatively, and then the innovation that we maybe refer to more often in business terms, in terms of you coming up with new and innovative solutions for business or for other areas. I think there is no doubt in my mind that in order to address many of the world's challenges, we certainly have to think innovatively.
Yeah.
And by that I mean, as the Americans like to say, if we go on doing what we've always done, we will always get what we've always got. And I think it's very important to challenge the way we think, often in disruptive ways, to think more innovatively about how to fix what are usually around the world long-term challenges. They're chronic world pains, if you like, and I think we need new mindsets to deal with these kind of issues. And then we also need to think of innovation in terms of more of the process of innovation. Typically I find in the business world, many business leaders see innovation, or they make the mistake, if you like, of seeing innovation as more optimization or fixing problems in their business, rather than looking for new and creative ways to generate new sources of value for their business and for society and so on and so forth. So I think in many cases on the business side, many businesses are innovating for profit and to solve their business challenges, and maybe that doesn't help us necessarily a great deal. But certainly on the behavioral side, I think, innovating is absolutely vital to come up with new and disruptive solutions, because we know the old ways don't work.
Yeah. By the way, there's no problem to innovation for profit, isn't it? And but can you see this happening today in some countries around the world? I mean, what has been the proposal for innovation in these places? You have a huge experience to do in the different countries, isn't it?
We're involved with quite an interesting project supporting UNICEF at the moment.
Nice.
UNICEF are obviously very focused on driving better lives for children around the world. And obviously for them, their relationship with business has changed over the last 10, 15, 20 years. In the past, what they referred to as checkbook philanthropy, which was businesses basically feeling sympathetic and handing out sums of cash to charities. This is gone now with modern pressures placed on business and so on. They have to raise funds in very different ways and build new value-based relationships with business in order to generate revenue so that they can do their work, fixing these problems for children around the world and bringing benefit to them. And it's interesting in the work we do that we recognize that, and PwC brought out a very interesting study looking at the top 10 things on the minds of C-level executives around the world. And there was a really interesting contrast there which shocked my colleagues at UNICEF, because bottom of the list of 10 was social purpose. Contrary to all the amazing things that we hear our business leaders around the world saying on stage and so on about how social purpose is integral to their strategy and driving their business and everything that they're about, it's actually bottom of the list of 10. And top of the list of 10 is innovation. Is top of mind for C-level executives. So one of the things we're trying to do with UNICEF is to connect innovation and social purpose. Because if potentially UNICEF, for example, or other charities can create new innovative relationships with their clients that drive innovative brand positioning, innovative new relationships in developing countries and so on and so forth, then they'll get money. And that money they can put to good use, solving problems and dealing with the challenges around the world. So there's a systemic relationship. Even when you bring business and charity together, you see this connection where innovation has to lead the relationship forward.
Could you give us, I don't know if you have an example for these social causes, for instance?
Well, it's the challenge always, I think, with social causes and social purpose in business is how much of it is actually real. And the same could be said for charities. I mean, I've worked with charities and NGOs before around the world, and I've never seen so many Rolexes and gold watches and fancy suits that these guys are wearing, so we all know not all of the money goes to the right places in these kind of situations. And with business, when is the social purpose real? When does it directly impact local business? And I think, we recognize there are some very legitimate companies out there who do this rather effectively. I can think of maybe Patagonia, Tom's shoes, where, these businesses really genuinely do what they say. It's not just this kind of greenwashing to make them look attractive from a brand perspective, when actually they've got small children working in factories in Vietnam building all their products. So, I think there are examples out there, not nearly as many as we would like. And of course, getting back to innovation, I think, innovating in relationships is important between business, between NGOs. Innovating within local communities in the developing world to provide innovative solutions and so on is also important.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I believe that innovation and technology exist to solve the problems of humanity. But when they resolve it, don't they end up creating others? In other words, don't believe that this theme that for our discussion today would be kind of, I don't know, of a little childish view of today's society?
Or almost a naive.
Naive, yeah, naive. Yeah, it's better. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we have to be very realistic and pragmatic with these things and not get carried away with the charisma and the cosmetics that surrounds the topic of innovation and fixing global problems and world problems. I mean, if we look at sustainable energy, and we look at the growth and developments of wind farms, in the early stages of the growth of wind farms around the world, we embrace these ideas as being novel and innovative technologies that will help solve our problems in the future. And yet, after several years now of utilizing these new technologies, we recognize that actually we have to look into it more deeply and more empathetically in a way, because in many cases it does more damage and costs more to produce the mechanics of these wind farms than it does the problems they solve. And yet again, that's balanced against, if we don't try these things and explore these technologies and learn from doing it, how do we ever progress? How do we ever grow and develop through technology in the world? Innovation still learns by its mistakes. Innovation is not perfect. It's not a perfect pill. So, I think innovation is an exploratory exercise, and we have to continue to explore to find the great successes and to find the mistakes.
Yeah. And please, don't get me wrong. I love technology and I love innovation. I work every day with innovation, but I think it's a tricky question. Let's look at this, the cell phones issue, for instance. When he was disseminated on the society, there was a promise of make our lives easier, which is true, by the way, but also a certain view that life would become better with it. Are you better off with it or not? If so, why do people always go on vacation, say they don't even want to look at their phones? It's practical life, but it's not a better life.
Yeah, and I think most of us that are tragically around the world in many respects had to suffer lockdowns of different types during the coronavirus situation, will actually, certainly a lot of people I've spoken to have said how they have actually enjoyed reconnecting with family and reconnecting with the environment and escaping some of those technological pressures that you're talking about. It's been quite a refreshing period as well as a tragic period for many people, and I think that sums up what you're saying. But I have to say my son has a very good example of the negative side of this. He works in the nightclub industry. And the nightclubs in the UK are suffering a massive decline at the moment. It's a dying industry, not because of coronavirus. This has happened before. And one of the groups of clubs that he works with, that owns many clubs around the country, commissioned an independent study because they couldn't work out why a historically successful business model would suddenly go into decline as it's been driven by young kids and hormones for generations. And the research they did and the observations they came back were fascinating and frightening at the same time. What they observed was that the problem was driven by phones that you were talking about and screens in general. In that young girls in particular were spending so much time creating rather false personas on Facebook and on Instagram and so on, where they were photoshopping their images to make themselves look more attractive.
Yeah.
They were taking pictures of themselves outside very expensive shops to imply that they had very expensive handbags and so on and so forth. And they were doing this to such an extent that they were reluctant to go out and have people actually discover who the real person was.
Ooh.
So they would rather inhabit a virtual world that they've created on screen for themselves than actually participate outside. And if they did go out, they'd go to... Nobody knows them. So, I mean, it just shows in a very simple example, you know, something that is clearly a useful tool, no doubt. It brings a lot of benefit, that can also be extremely destructive to individuals and their social interaction, but actually kill an industry.
Yeah, it's kind of a Black Mirror situation, isn't it?
Yeah, it can be.
I have no idea. Yeah, but when talk about generations, and when you compare the situation of the past generation to the current one, I believe that contemporary society is the one that is worst able to deal with pain and suffering. Result, I don't know. It's just an idea. Just
yeah. I mean, I think.
I think it's. I don't know, but. Maybe this happens result of the enrichment and ease of a current life that happened in the last decades. Don't you think, Stuart? Is today?
It could well be. I mean, what's interesting, I think, in what you're saying is the generation before us and the generation before that would have probably said the same thing. You know, they would have probably said, "You kids are soft.
Yeah,
we're all tough back in our day. You have it too easy."
Perfect.
But I think there is something in what you're saying. But I think it's driven by something slightly different. I think today's generation has a very, very strong appetite for control.
Yes.
And most successful innovations that are released into society nowadays, if we think of the Ubers, the Airbnbs, the classic ones, give people more control over their lives.
Yeah.
And that's why we like them, and that's why they're successful. And I think the thing about control, rather than sort of softness or hardness, is that once people get a sense of what control can give them, they want more and more. Mm-hmm. And I think our generation nowadays really, really resents being out of control and has a huge appetite for being fed with more and more innovative products and services that give them more and more control over their lives. Whereas I think the previous generations, our generation, the generations before, accepted more that there was, you know, we didn't have control over everything. Fate was fate, and we had to take things in our stride, as we say in English. But I think the modern day generation is less enthusiastic about that.
Yeah. This aspect is very interesting because we deal with this issue in the first video for New Horizon Talks. People want more and more control. And you can see all the apps, you see more and more control. But it's interesting to note that the marketing society promises that people will be rich and happy. Since this often doesn't happen, do you believe that this false promise can generate a resentment on a large scale in society?
Yes, I mean, if I take the example I just gave from the situation with the girls and the screens and nightclubs and so on, the appetite that's driving their activity is influencers. It's influencers on YouTube, it's influencers on Instagram, some of whom my son knows, who basically travel the world, stay in luxury hotels, fly around business class, have a great life, live the dream, as our kids say nowadays, all paid for by sponsorship from various products they endorse and so on and so forth. And in particular, working class people really aspire to and admire these people who via social media display their riches and this dream world that 99% of them will never ever attain. But because of that, I think there is a perception amongst many people, many younger people growing up nowadays, that all of this is within reach. Every 15-year or a lot of 15-year-olds, if you ask them now, don't want to be doctors or firemen when they grow up. They want to be influencers on YouTube or this kind of thing. And so there will be a lot of disappointed people out there. But influencers, but we still need doctors and truck drivers and firemen. So I think I sense that the generation growing up nowadays is quite a frustrated generation. It's quite an uncontented generation.
I agree.
They aspire to wanting a lot of things because things are much more visible nowadays because of technology than they were in the past. We didn't. I mean, every child now before Christmas, putting their Christmas list together, goes onto the internet to check out what they want. Whereas in the past, you only saw what was available because one of your friends had it. Now you know everything that's available and you want everything. So the availability of stuff, of products, of services, and all these things provides us with more and more opportunity, but it can also provide more and more disappointment if you don't have it.
And on one side you have the promise that to be happy and rich, but what people actually get is to buy a cheaper cell phone, travel different places, buy new clothes, etc. But for this happens, it's often necessary to work on something that the person does not like, or worse, destroy their relationships. Over time, the market itself offers a self-help literature that I hate, by the way, always saying it's for us to continue because it will improve in the future. In the future. I don't know when, but in the future. I don't know. I've been too pessimistic or realistic. I don't know. What do you think, Stuart, about this thing?
I think it's interesting if you look at successful people, and that in itself is a big discussion. What does success mean? If we think of success in terms of here, we're talking a lot about business and so on. Successful people in business and so on. They're typically very driven people. If I think of a book by Shane Snow called Smart Cuts, he did a study of 6,000 or so successful business people. And one of his quotes from that was that successve business leaders don't stop. They don't take breaks. They don't have holidays. They don't have this work-life balance that we all aspire to. And you're quite right. Being very successful requires hard work. In most cases, it doesn't come easy. Otherwise, we'd all be multimillionaires and running amazing businesses. It comes with hard work and so on and so forth. But I think what we have to do is consider, what we mean by success. And I think, as we said before, the generation growing up now sees success in a certain way. But for people of you and my age, we're at a stage in our lives when maybe we reflect back at earlier periods of our lives. For me, for example, if I think of my early career, I was lucky enough to be paid for my hobby and run an adventure company and work in the world's beautiful places, doing amazing things. And I was very successful at doing that and had an incredible time. And sometimes now I bump into old friends who are still doing it. I stopped 30 years ago. And I look at them and they live very modestly. They don't have many assets. They're certainly not rich by any stretch of the imagination, but they have an extraordinarily wonderful quality of life. And they're very contented generally, very happy, because they're connected with the environment emotionally, they're less stressed. all of these kind of things. And I ask myself, did I make the right decision? Would I be happier now if I'd stayed doing that kind of thing than pursued a perhaps more business focused, more driven approach that I've done? You don't know.
Yeah. Another question that comes to my mind is, how could brands reverse this false promise of the marketing using innovation? Is it possible to do?
How could brands?
Yeah.
That's a tricky one.
I don't know. I don't have the answer for
making promises.
Yeah, I don't have the answer. Thinking about it.
If you look at brand evolution itself, we moved from the original purpose of the brand was to create greater visibility for products and services. That was the original idea. Then brand promise appeared, and brand promise was there to imply to the purchaser that you would get something more than just what the product or service did. Some sort of promise of added value. It would make you look cool, it would make you healthier, whatever it might be. And then, of course, we now have brand purpose that people talk about. And brand purpose is more typically, on the one hand, connected with some form of social or ethical purpose behind it, as well as just the product or service, which gives it an extra sense of worth, if you like, because it's providing this added benefit. But the interesting thing about brands with purpose is that very often they're kind of co-created with their audience a bit. And I think perhaps the answer lies in more co-creation as we move forward. If I think of innovative projects that I'm working on at the moment, and some other innovative organizations that are starting to emerge to promote innovation around the world, in the absence very often of good and positive movement from governments, who are notoriously slow at this. If I think of an organization started recently by Ramin Kress, the ex-chief digital officer at Henkel, has started an organization called the Human Capital Network very recently. And this brings together entrepreneurs, startups, academics, consultants, venture capitalists, all together in a kind of platform community to drive new opportunities for new innovation with social purpose, because they believe if we wait for governments, we'll wait forever. More the responsibility of business to drive innovation with social purpose, and so that they're creating these kind of organizations to help do it. So I think it is possible to reverse this phenomena, if you like, through more co-creation with end users. I'm working a project myself at the moment in healthcare, for example, because it's interesting. It's using technology to solve a problem that technology created. So as you all know, doctors have a bit of a problem on their hands nowadays, because patients are becoming, or their potential patients are becoming, amazingly well educated. We all go on Google as soon as we get a headache or a sore foot or whatever, we go onto Google, we become a medical expert within a few days, and we go to our doctor and we tell them what's wrong with us.
Doctor loves this kind of thing.
And in the past, so technology has given us this knowledge now, whereas in the past, knowledge was power for doctors. They had the power. We did what we were told. We didn't challenge them. We didn't question them, and so on. So in the case of a project I'm working on at the moment, it's particularly looking at medical cannabis treatment. And doctors are rather confused still about the benefits of medical cannabis. There hasn't been as detailed research as there has for other medicines and so on yet. But there's a huge patient demand for cannabis. So very well-educated, well-informed patients, because of Google, are going along to their doctors and saying, I want cannabis.
Yeah.
I don't want an opioid with all the side effects. I don't want other analgesics and so on. So we're producing a platform at the moment to connect producers with doctors, with pharmacists, with patients, so that they can co-create together on a digital platform the best therapies with the best products from the best sources, with the best dosing devices and so on. And this will actually be an exchange between the doctor and the patient to co-create therapy together. And what this does is this manages risk for the doctor.
Yeah.
It also, it also gives them some authority because it's based on research and the latest data and so on. So everybody wins in this kind of situation. So it's a very good example of what we were talking about earlier, the negative effects of technology, then being fixed by the positive effects as we come to another phase of technological development and so on.
It's an interesting approach, but there's a culture problem, I think.
All around the world.
Yeah, it's interesting. For instance, right now in Brazil, there's an Apple commercial which talks about a character. It's not a person, it's a character who wants to do things as well as other people who had an iPhone. Now that he has bought an iPhone, he's happier because it does not crash or there's no problem with the iPhone. Again, the promise to live better because of a product. This kind of naive situation, I think.
Yeah, I mean, this is human nature, though.
Yeah,
I mean, this is what you're talking about is envy.
Yes.
I mean, marketing has used the envy tool.
Yeah.
I mean, we used to call it social proof in the old days. Somebody else has got it, so I need it. The best people in the world for doing this are teenagers. Teenagers going to their parents, I have to have this jacket because all my friends have got it.
Yeah.
I'm the only one in the group who doesn't have this jacket or these training shoes or whatever. Yeah. My mother, who recently left us, always reminded me at every Christmas of when I was 16 years old. I used to go to her and say, if I don't have this amazing pair of Adidas rugby boots, I'll just be bullied at school. And then she would come to school and watch me play rugby, and I would be the only kid with these Adidas rugby boots that she'd bought me. You know, so envy is human nature. We always want what others have, and we have this expression, the grass is always greener on the other side. And Apple's a very good example. Apple has mastered this technique. I mean, I remember having a discussion with my son and swearing I would never ever queue for a product. And one day I found myself in a queue for an Apple product. So even I, with my sensitivity to the topic, fell victim to this, wanting one of these products in this way. And you're right, it's a false promise. It's a false God. Yeah. It won't make you healthier. It won't make you live longer. It won't make you more handsome. It won't, you're basically just wanting to fit in. I think one of the interesting evolutions that happened, we were talking about kids growing up and teenagers before. I think our generation, when we were younger, it was fashionable to be a rebel. It was fashionable to be the one who stood out as being different. Whereas now it's much more fashionable to conform, to be the same as the others. And rebels very often nowadays are more outcast, whereas rebels were the cool guys in our day. And I think if you look at Apple's quite an interesting example, because when the Mac was invented, Macintosh, it was for nerds. It was for rebels.
Yeah.
And
now now Apple is the mainstream.
Exactly. So, they were smart enough, you could argue, as a business at some point, probably in the early 2000s, mid 2000s, to recognize that they needed street credibility in order to continue to grow their business. So they moved away from being the product for nerds to the product for fashionable people, for the elite. And they played on the envy game, and they did that with beautiful designs and cosmetics and so on. I mean, I know that technologically my Apple phone is not as good as many of the competition, but I still own it. I still want one.
Yeah, it's my case also. Here, you can see the iPhone. Yeah, because actually, we know that
not as good a phone as some others.
That yes, and we know that the persons buy thinks much more for emotional reason than rational reason, isn't it?
But I think something you said earlier resonated with me about, how can we reverse this tide? I've been working on a very interesting project, a strategy, a change project with an advertising agency in Germany recently. And as part of their shift internally, they've moved more towards social purpose within the work they're doing and so on. And we spent some time building this concept, if you like, with them and building the content for it with the employees. So we all got together as an organization and built a kind of manifesto for the future.
Yeah.
And one of the words that obviously came up was sustainability, and topics like this came up in their manifesto. And I was very interested to see that many of the younger people in the organization were quite vocal in challenging the legitimacy of these claims. Mm-hmm. They were saying, hang on a minute, how can we claim this stuff about our organization when our office has cut out a piece of the forest to be built in? And we give company cars to our senior managers that are all petrol or diesel. We have to be very careful if we make these claims to our customers and to our audience, and it's not true. And I think it's the first time in 30 odd years of consulting that I've worked with organizations where younger people are holding their hand up and saying, if we're going to do this, it must be legitimate.
Yeah.
And maybe I think it's because, they have experience in the last 15, 20 years or so of the fake attempts to do this. They've seen it in the media, they've seen it in the news and so on and so forth. And they want it the way they want it. But perhaps it's to do with control as well, that we talked about earlier. Mm-hmm. They want more control over this.
Mm-hmm. What do you think, in your opinion, is the future of innovation?
I think, to be honest, if we've only got to look at the past to understand the future of innovation, in the sense that innovation has always been with us. When I first started working, they used to call it research and development. Now they call it innovation. I think, it's very much on trend at the moment, and we could talk about disruption as well as being on trend and so on. We will always need to reinvent things for the greater good, whether it's for business profit or for more efficiency or for better lives or whatever it is. We will always continue to repackage the past to try and do something better for the future. And I think it will go on. I just think perhaps the key message to take from it is the rate of acceleration will increase. What we've seen, if we look at the span of human history, the rate of incremental acceleration of innovation in the recent last 200, 300 years has been astronomical. And obviously, as computing power gets stronger and faster, the rate of innovation is going to accelerate incrementally and drastically. And I think this is when we're going to have problems, is whether humans can keep up. I mean, I know this working in the field myself. My brain struggles to keep up with stuff. And I also think back to this happening earlier, when I remember reading an article maybe 20, 30 years ago. And I was working at the time with Marconi, the old radio company in the UK, who were making head-up displays for fighter jets. And one of the guys who was working there told me that the problem they were having with modern fighter jets is that the technology was feeding too much information in the cockpit for the pilots to digest. The human brain couldn't multitask quick enough anymore, even the best fighter pilots and test pilots in the world. And they went through quite a long period of finding it very difficult to work with pilots in these modern fighter jets and so on. Now, technology's taken another leap and we have artificial intelligence and so on. They're building quite a bit of AI into military cockpits on fighter jets and so on to take some of the load off the pilot, to make it less complex in terms of human processing, so that it's doing it for them.
But I think in this, in another level, this happened with us. We have a lot of information. You see a lot of ads. You see a lot of new products, new information. It's a cognitive problem sometimes. It's too much information.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and a classic reflection of this is because of our appetite for control, most of us download endless apps onto our phones, of which ultimately we only use maybe 5% or 10%. Eventually we take them off our phones again because we never use them. We couldn't possibly use all these different apps. There's just too much we put on to digest. And I personally struggle with so many different forms of communication, which has been made even more obvious through the coronavirus pandemic and so on. You know, there's YouTube, there's social channels, and then we obviously have Zoom, we have Skype, we have all the, keeping up with all of these different channels. I have to apologize. I often miss your WhatsApps when you send them to me because I'm checking up the channels and.
No problem. I do the same.
There are so many things to check,
Yeah. Well, it's good. And you live in exponential times.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think another interesting thing to consider is that. Something I've learned about working with people in organizations, and it's talked about very often, is that, we often comment in organizational change, but it's much harder for people to let go of things than it is to adopt new things. The more I've worked with change in organizations, which is basically human behavior, how do humans change in organizations, the more I recognize I have to invest a lot of time in organizations helping people stop doing stuff as much as helping them do new things, because we're very, very reluctant to break old habits because we feel secure and so on. And I think this is going to be one of the challenges of innovation, is that with so much new stuff being fed to us all the time, I find it personally quite difficult stopping doing stuff quick enough to allow space for the new stuff. And I wonder if our brains are going to have to adapt to this somehow in the future, whereby we have less of a tendency to hang on to the old. A reflection of this as well is the sort of throwaway society now. Our kids are growing up quite happy with disposable things, whereas many people of our generation like to repair stuff. I hate throwing things away. I like to repair them if they break or whatever. But younger kids don't. They're much happier having disposable things, because if I'm attached to my old things, I have less space for the new stuff, and that's why manufacturers don't like you repairing things. They would rather things break and you buy new stuff and so on. So I wonder whether the human brain will have the capacity to let go fast enough to do the new stuff.
It's interesting because of this approach changes in one generation.
I think there have been signs in the past. I think we've been going this way. If I think, when I was young was the start of this, really. And you could see the signs, but it's rapidly accelerating. Really, really quickly.
Well, Stuart, this conversation of ours could go on for a long time, but you have to end today's conversation. You know that that's always a pleasure for me to talk to you on a topic that we like a lot, which is innovation. I'd like to thank you very much for your participation today.
It's my pleasure. No, it's always great chatting, and as you know, I love working down in Brazil, so this is a nice way to keep in touch in a way, and hopefully I'll get down and see you guys in the country again soon.
Nice. I've been waiting for you the next 15 days, every Tuesday at 8 p.m. with a new team here on the Horizon Consulting and YouTube channel on the New Horizon Talks program. Thank you very much, and till then.
Okay. Thanks, Fabio. Bye for now.
Thanks.